Me.
Good morning. It is 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, October 10th, 2024, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Committee Chair Kate Huseman presiding. Also present are my Vice Chair Molly O'Reilly and committee members Aaron Billings, Evan Lewis, Peterson, and Reed Weber. Committee member Julie Perchinsky is absent. In addition to the committee, council liaison Deb Rule is also present. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our September 5th, 2024 meeting. Thank you. We hear a second? Second. Thank you, Molly. All in favor, just raise your hands. Anyone opposed? None opposed. Motion passes and the minutes are approved as presented.
Madam Chairman, point of order. Who was the motion on that, please?
Who is the what?
Who made that motion? And just for future reference, and we'll need to redo this vote, Deb's not a voting member.
Oh.
Yeah,
right. Forgot.
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna redo the meeting minutes approval.
I thought I heard a voice over there. And I said, it's
Can I
gotta be
make
Deb.
the motions or no?
No.
Can't make the motions
Yeah,
either.
okay.
Okay.
I so move.
You so moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion, all in favor? Raise your hand. Okay. Motion passes and the minutes are approved as presented. So with no old business on the agenda, we'll move to new business and a report from staff on the recent Walkability Summit. But since the staff person who is going to give the report has not yet arrived, who else was at the Walkability Summit? Would you?
Reed and I were, we
And,
could do it.
and Aaron
Oh,
was?
Aaron, yes,
Okay.
you were.
Okay, well, Aaron, can you give us a little summary of what you learned at the summit? And then Reed and Molly, we may want to hear from you too.
Well, we went on a walk audit with Mark Fenton, and a couple of the big things I learned that we could do, lower cost things was paint on the roadways. So if we don't have money for the sidewalks yet, we could paint a pedestrian or a bicycle, right away on the road if it's wide enough. And also, he just gave us some great tips on division right around the school and what to be looking for as far as bringing up to get improvements for pedestrian and bicycle. And pass it on to someone else.
Reed, you want to say what you heard?
Sure. Yeah. So I thought it was a neat event, and just as like a tool for engaging with stakeholders in the community to actually walk through different streets through Sandpoint. I think that was a good learning experience. That's something that we can maybe host in some way in the future, especially with certain areas.
What do you mean by
Throughout the
host?
town. Host, like we would host out. So what we did on that day was walk around all the way from City Hall down to the middle school, and kind of along the way we stopped and actually assessed the sidewalk and the experience as a pedestrian, our safety level, and your comfort, and kind of just did somewhat of a grading system. And then kind of got a feel for like what are areas that could use some focus. And then like Aaron was saying, we actually we did like a little pop-up bulb out at the Division and Michigan intersection right at the high school, just to kind of give a feel for like how you could make that intersection maybe more pedestrian friendly with pretty minimal cost up front. If it is just like cones, for example, how much more, you shorten the distance across the intersection, you'd slow down traffic, little things that would have a big impact. So just kind of, that was some good learning experience, just doing the walk around tour of Sandpoint, and then some low cost kind of pop-up opportunities to address certain intersections to actually just test out, see if there's a design intervention that could work in that area.
Okay, sounds cool. For the record, Jason Welker, staff liaison, has arrived at the meeting.
Thank you.
And Jason, I know you wanted to present too, but we started with us since you
That's
weren't here.
okay. My phone rang and it was the city attorney, right, as I was about to come
Okay.
down, so you don't ignore
Well,
that call.
and-
And we've invited Holly Ellis, our
Okay.
construction manager and engineer, to join the committee today as well.
Okay,
Holly's gonna kind of help me out with the staff liaison responsibilities. Holly is also probably the staff person most in the know about our multimodal transportation plan, and she has overseen some of the implementation of the pedestrian improvements in that plan in the last couple of years.
cool.
So we've invited.
Welcome, Holly.
Too. Thank you.
So let's go on with Molly talking about the summit, and then you wanted to say something about it too, is that correct?
Oh, no, I just wanted to hear what the committee members had to say about their experience with it.
Okay, so Molly, what did you pick up?
Mark Bent was always inspiring and educational. I liked his presentation because it made it clear that the ability, focusing on walking and biking in a town improves life for everybody. And walk audits are dramatically important. We actually do have a small planning company in Idaho that does walk audits. If we are interested in hosting one, to do a really good job. I pick up on details like flowing traffic and making sure that cars coming behind you, turning right into you as you. Just all those details, but he did a great job. It was well worth the time and outstanding.
So I've heard, help me remember your name.
Jen.
Jen, so for the record, Jennifer Hill. Jennifer Hill, thank you, has arrived. Does anyone have anything else they want to say about that? I'm not sure there's action to be done on it at the time. We
Yeah,
just,
my question was it at an educational event? Was that the broad goal of the event?
It was sponsored by Blue Cross Foundation because this is one of the cities that has gotten. What's the name of the grant?
Yes, there's a program called the Community Health Academy that Sandpoint was accepted into this year, along with about 9 or 10 other cities from around the state. And the mayor and myself have been either both attending or taking turns attending different workshops, some on Zoom, some in person. This was the third in-person workshop. There've been a couple down in Boise, and each workshop has had a different theme. Child mental health was a theme. Housing was a theme of a workshop down in Boise. The theme of this one was walkability. So each of the workshops had a theme to basically enhance community health. It's the overall theme. This is a program funded by a donation from Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos's ex-wife. She gives billions of dollars out to good causes around the country, and the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation happened to receive a big grant from her. So they put together this whole academy, and at the end of it, the city receives a $20,000 grant that we can put towards something that supports the advancement of community health as kind of presented throughout the academy. So they were looking for a North Idaho host for the Walkability Summit, and I was like, we'll do it.
Yeah.
For the record, I'm sorry, are you Jen?
I'm Taylor.
You're Taylor, I'm sorry, you're Jen. So, Taylor, your last name is not Schweitzer, that's why.
Taylor Schweitzer.
Last name is Prather.
Okay, I wrote Schweitzer to help me remember a little bit about you. All right, so that's good. We're all here except for the person that we knew was not going to be here. So it's exciting. The agenda suggests that we might want to discuss whether there are possible next steps for this committee relative to the Walkability Summit, and we have a little more time to discuss that. Do any of you have thoughts about what this body or a subcommittee of this body might want to do with the information we got from the summit?
One thought, wondering if we can get access to some of the information that came out of it. Audit seemed like a good way, like reading through the broader plan. It seems like one of the big goals is kind of quality of the sidewalks. And if there's some information from this study that we could incorporate to understand the zones that were assessed, as just part of the information gathering. If we could get access to that information, it might help inform future decisions that are presented to this group.
I don't think the walk audit was recorded in any way, but I saw in our packet that the slides from his presentation were there,
Okay.
which gives a fair bit of. It's enhanced by his explaining some things, but it's also got some general sources, et cetera. So that's worth reviewing.
You're talking about the slides that came in our packet.
Yes.
And I wanted to mention that to you, Heather. That packet was 200 pages long. It was a little overwhelming.
No,
And for me, I found the slides, I'm suddenly remembering, I found the slides in there and it's a great deal of effort. I managed to extract that and change it to 5 smaller documents. Can we have separate documents in our packet instead of just one big one in the future?
Heather, you might show them, show the committee how to view the packet as an HTML file so that they don't have to open.
Oh, I can do that.
Big, because you can open it as one large packet, or you can go on and click on individual links to each individual item. That's how I always do it.
Oh, so that's the
think you might have-
HTML
yeah, I
link.
think you might have
Oh,
downloaded
okay,
the
I'll
entire
look
packet.
into that.
If you go to the HTML,
Right.
it looks like this, and then you can click on each one as a separate document.
Okay,
So don't hit the other one. Hit
Right.
The HTML, and then you can click on what you want.
thank you so much.
Okay.
Very useful information.
But Kate, I'm impressed that you managed to find the whole 400-page packet,
It was,
wade through it.
yeah, it was,
Still a lot of homework.
I would say one thing which I forgot to mention is he kind of mentioned we didn't have, in some areas, very good wayfinding signage to the trails or side, like to City Beach. I mean, we do out to City Beach, but when we were going down towards like the Dover Trail, there was no like signage saying, hey, there's a trail like this far away. So maybe wayfinding signs. And then at one point, and I'm not sure who did the map, we had a map that I don't know if we paid for. It was suggested that Safe Routes might help pay for it, and we're totally on board with that. But we'd want to have a safe route on there for kids, and especially in the winter where the snow would be enforced.
the snow
Um,
removal.
It's a map, like a pedestrian bicycle map
Mhm.
that the bike shops would have,
Yeah, there is a bike route.
but nobody's printed it in a long time that I'm aware of.
Yeah, we can get it. The original artwork from Rebecca Holland, if needed, the previous pedestrian bicycle advisory committee developed those bike routes and the wayfinding, but I'm not sure all the wayfinding got funded.
Right.
And
So we
all
might
of
want,
the-
maybe or something.
yeah, and it only has bicycling on it. It doesn't have pedestrian times.
And if we were to do it, we would just want like snow routes included where they would be enforcing it, where kids could walk.
That we don't know.
Right, I'm saying if Safe Routes helped
Yeah.
fund it, we're
Exactly.
definitely willing to do that with our grant,
I
but
think the map needs updating
Yes.
because I think
Yes.
even as some of the streets have changed and that it would behoove the city to create a newer map with what you're saying, add the pedestrian routes to it, make sure that we are getting shuttling enforcement and things like that. Because some of the things on the old route have changed, so there does need to be updating too.
we did use them in some of our education to students at like Washington.
A lot of it's still accurate. A lot of it is still
So
accurate.
I'm gonna kind of hold on to this idea, but at the end of this meeting, if we have time, talk about whether we want to form subcommittees that might want to pursue some things. So rather than going on all those details right now, I would like to move on for the next item on our agenda. But I will make a note that this is one thing that we might want to ask a subcommittee to work
I had a comment on the first one, if that's okay.
on.
On the first agenda item before we move on.
Okay,
Just about relative to the slideshow and stuff, things that are going to be happening within the city and might be interesting is doing some of the temporary reconfiguring at First Avenue and Bridge Street because we're working on the engineering for all of that. And maybe doing that in a busier time of the year to see how that would function. I know that we historically did do that one day, but just blocking off other pieces. And then another concern that came up when I was looking at the slideshow is the use of mini rounds. And I think that that could be something that could be really functional on some of the cut-through streets that people hop on Superior and zip up and go all the way across to initiate some traffic slowing, and some of those streets are plenty wide enough for those. So maybe doing some trials and just keeping that, all that stuff in the bucket with, this type of thing, and start to think about where we could do some trials and how they would play into educating us about what may work or may not work before the city invests money in that. So, so anyway, those were just some thoughts I had as I was looking through this. And, I've asked for paint for so long, sitting up on the council, and they're like, oh, it's gotta be special kind of paint, or it's gotta be this kind of paint. And then I get the walkability studies that they just wing it. And I've always wanted to have a crosswalk in front of the Canada that's full of musical instruments or something fun and different to welcome the city. So I'm hoping we can do some more fun things at Sandpoint.
We did the walkability summit, the idea of decorative crosswalks did come up at one point.
It could be in between the white, but you have to have for visually impaired, you have to have.
Right.
Yeah.
There are
Although
different
the
ways to
white
do
could
that.
be lines, not cross, but lines, and then you could do that in between. And the other important thing about the white is it's the only reflective surface that the MUTCD allows on the asphalt. And so if it's gonna be safe at night, you need that white. But that's not to say you can't do a bunch of other stuff too.
But
So
again, committee stuff,
So,
details.
yeah, if we could put this off for the subcommittee to, I mean, I'm trying to make a list for you, but we need to, I would like to try to address everything on our agenda today, and so we need to keep moving. The next item was what we just decided was the MP, and it's listed here on the agenda, Multimodal Transportation Master Plan. So I'm sorry, I've referred to it as the MMTP a lot, and I will try to be more consistent with MTMP. So Jason wanted to say something about that, and then Molly has made her own summary of it, which is, you should have gotten did you hear me, Tom?
I did.
So she was gonna summarize it from a ped bike perspective. So, Jason, why don't you go ahead and give your introduction, and then we can ask Molly to provide her summary too.
Well, I don't have a whole lot. Just wanted to make sure everybody's able to find it. First of all, our website's been kind of a mess. We finally got our master plans page up and running again last week, so I apologize if the first link I sent you didn't take you to the correct place. I think I resent another one a couple days ago. Yeah, this was being formed about the time I started getting involved in city stuff 4 or 5 years ago, and one thing I've always appreciated about it is the concept of the priority networks, the pedestrian priority network and the bicycle priority network, which are in the appendices. And I really appreciate how the city has prioritized our sidewalk improvements based on those priority networks. It's a very thoughtful way to go about infrastructure dollar allocation. And that's why I thought it's a good idea to have Polly in this committee. She's one of the team members of the city who's looking at that priority network and making decisions about how to spend our limited sidewalk dollars. So yeah, that just kind of that concept, the idea of figuring out, and maybe there's some review of those priority networks that this committee can do as well and provide input on. But just the idea that and for example, I ride my bike across town daily, and I understand that Oak Street is part of the bicycle priority network. So I always make my way to Oak Street because it's got the sharrows and it's got the, nice tree cover, and it's just considered, I don't know if a lot of people realize that that's part of our bicycle priority network, but I do, either because I've seen the map or because there's very faded sharrows on the road there that I can barely make out when I ride. But for either reason, that's just become the way I ride across town. So that idea, the priority networks is just something that kind of stands out from this multimodal transportation master plan to me. So I'm kind of interested to hear how the committee interpreted the goals and objectives, the appendices with all of the different networks. So I'm gonna see what the committee thought.
Molly, do you want to, Molly's going to give a summary for us. And then I would love to hear what some of the rest of you thought and the extent you had an opportunity to review the MP. And Molly has some definite opinions about it.
Ollie has a few opinions about it. Well, first of all, my observation that the goal of a plan like this is to define funding the project. And you will see that throughout it. And the document you've got, and you don't have to look at it now. Kate asked, how do we look at this? And so the headings for chapters are pretty explanatory. And what they do is pretty explanatory, but every now and then there's something that's really important. Like in 3, vision statement, it says in line 3, enhancing Sandpoint's role as a regional hub. It's not for walking and biking, that's for motor vehicles. And if we're doing that, we're probably sacrificing some livability. We could look at Lane as an example. I just keep that in mind as we go through. They say pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access are prioritized downtown and between neighborhood schools, libraries, blah, blah. And talk about quality of life. But you're going to be balancing here. And under goals and objectives, goal 2 talks about providing a walkable and bikeable network throughout the community, and then has a bunch of objectives under walkability. And this is just talking straight out of the plan. And those all have some value. And I'm not going to go into them in detail, but we need to know they're there and use them in our committee as we develop things. And then existing an analysis is pretty much and the automobiles, we categorize and prioritize every single street in the city. At one point, the city of Sandpoint had a pedestrian priority network that had high, medium, and low, and broke out the priorities among the high. That was quite some time ago, but it seems like that should happen with walking and biking. Every street is high, medium, or low priority. We know where it stands and work from there. And then under chapter 5 is their description, presents outcomes of the analysis in section 4, including various improvements, and talks then about pedestrian priority work, or the bicycle priority network, updated truck routes, Division Avenue, Balding Mountain, Great Northern, East West Hunting, First Bridge, Way 2 corridor access management. Access management means you don't stop through traffic. You don't have crossings. Any other mode. And then there's a pretty detailed look at the pedestrian priority network. And again, there's existing conditions, issues, and considerations. It points out that it's stated in Appendix A. We could go wanted to have that up on my computer and can get to appendix A. Maintenance, no. Access to and from the Amtrak station. I walked there in the middle of the night. It was fine to me, but it's pretty trouble for some. Talks about working with staff to identify priorities and improve pedestrian access to and from. It's really important. You can't ride the bus if you can't get to and from the bus stop. And develop a traffic calming request program policy, which I think is great. But then the bicycle priority networks. This is all very two bullets and a short paragraph. Bicycles and spot are the transit are the least mentioned modes in this plan. So there's basically nothing. And I think those on this committee that care about the bicycles in the city will really dig in and buy this. And then we go through pretty much, it is what it says it is. To the end, and then I had some opinions which maybe put separate from everything else. Fair enough. The level of service used by itself is controversial. And Mark Fenton made that very clear. It prioritizes moving cars and means that if your level of service is too good, you are overbuilding for what you need. If you move during peak period through an intersection with no delay, 23 hours a day, it's overbuilt. And that's an expense. Overbuilding is a long-term expense. And wider and faster streets are, the less bicycles and people walk feel safe and comfortable using them. So I do talk about level of service, and it also appears that we might consider building to 20-year projections. Build today to a 20-year projection, going to fill way faster because improvements capacity to motor vehicle generate more traffic. As you have watched the highway between Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint get faster and more improved, you can see that it has generated more traffic. There are studies of it. If anybody needs proof, I'll get you proof. Truly, when you make it easier to go between A and B, it induces enough traffic to create congestion. It's just how long does that take? And so walking is talked about often, but not all streets. Their rankings developed previously are mentioned. And there's not a plan to redo this plan immediately. So I don't think we should spend a lot of time with it, except I think that we need to be very involved when any of the projected improvements are actually starting to be thought about. If we come in late in the process, we'll have way less impact than if they get brought to us early and we can really analyze the walking and biking impacts and ways to make walking and biking better there. And then the potential bike and walking discussion items. It's always easier for a committee to reject and come up with new than to start with a blank piece of paper. That's what I did. I think I stayed in my 10 minutes,
You did a
right?
great job, Molly. Thank you.
And answer any question.
Yeah, do any of us have thoughts about Molly, what Molly said, or questions or other responses to our own reading of the MTMP?
Team.
I see down here at the bottom, the walking potential obstructions. Just in the last week, there has been several trees that are way down in the sidewalk or covering speed limit signs or covering signs that say don't park from here to the corner. So I don't know how to educate people better. I did report one of them to the city because it's the one going straight from Farman south. There was like 3 times, or a fence that's like leaning over towards the sidewalk. So things like that. There was one right in Division yesterday when we were walking to school that's hanging and was hit.
Just, are you talking about aspects of road maintenance in the
Sidewalk,
MT? Sidewalk maintenance.
That's hanging into sidewalks.
But as relates to the MTMP,
Well, it says several times in their maintenance.
Maintenance,
and making
okay.
Sure things are walkable. Because
Okay.
it's not, if you're running into
see.
trees and
Trees, shrubs,
Yeah.
parked vehicles.
that too.
Yeah.
There's parked vehicles on the routes.
Yeah.
And so you should report it if you see it, and you shouldn't feel bad about it because it is all in the city ordinance. And the crows, we usually will take care of those things, and people don't get fined, they just get asked to, remove the obstruction or take care of it. And then if it becomes an issue and they've gone multiple times, then there's other ways to manage that.
But just seeing so many, maybe there's better education we could do to
Well,
the owners because maybe
yeah.
they don't know.
Yes, a lot of them don't.
There used to be the early pack developed and we weren't politically savvy. We didn't involve the city enough, so they never really used it. A sidewalk owner's manual, but just a little trifold with a variety of things. Got it on my computer. I can provide it. Be looked at the next meeting, but there's no point in printing it if the city doesn't feel they can hand it out, use it. It's not something they support. And Tammy Oma did the layout, but she thinks it's old enough that it might not be retrievable. To sort of start over.
okay.
But yes, education and branch pickup, leaf pickup. I mean, anytime there should be a lot more about, hey, great opportunity to,
Sidewalk, yeah, right.
yeah,
Just so everybody's aware, the code requires that adjacent property owners prune trees up to 7 feet above public sidewalks.
I tell people that.
I'm 6'5", so trust me, I can tell you everywhere in South Sandpoint where there's branches below 7 feet, so I've hit them all with my face.
Winter snows, those branches get way low.
Yeah. But I do agree that the education part, if we're gonna put out in the paper that it's branch pickup time, we could put another sentence in there
Hey,
that
while you're at it, clip all those branches that are hanging over the sidewalks and get them for you.
maybe not say it that way, Jason.
So, because there's several.
Pretty generous.
Deb, you mentioned crows, which I presume are not blackbirds, something.
That's what we call the resource officer.
Okay,
We call
thank you.
them. Community resource officer. S, a plural is CROS.
How do we report things to the city?
Was told you just email to the contact us now, and that's what I did, but I haven't seen anything get fixed by doing that.
You can
yet,
call.
So,
Who?
You can call
It's
the
a-
non-emergency number at the police department.
Yeah.
Just say you want to do
Enforcement.
that because they're part, the crows are part of that, so that's the enforcement part.
She'll pick up the phone right there, and then radio a crow. The crow will be there within a few minutes to notify the neighbors.
which they
No,
told
they're
me,
super responsive.
which they told me we had to leave the parked vehicle, because there was one every morning over by Farman, and she's like, well, you have to tell me when it's there because it's not always there, so.
These crows are like literally within minutes, they'll be out there.
Yeah, so
But I didn't know for branches, I was doing it more for stuff that had to be done right.
anything that you think needs addressing, you can go through the crows, and if it's not something they're gonna manage, they'll shift it elsewhere.
So if you email the contact us, are they putting it out to the clerks or?
I don't know if the contact
I
us.
think that does go to Melissa.
Yes. A central location for notifying the city of any issue is through the contact us on our website. There are a couple of us who monitor that all the time. So we are immediately fielding those and getting them out to staff members who can actually go address those. And frequently it is community resource officers. But as you had mentioned, and this is what happened with Engage Sandpoint a lot, is that there'd be something put in there. It was over the weekend or in the evening or something, and they didn't get to it right away. And then by the time they got there, the issue was no longer there. So one thing they do ask is you can call the city and you can call the general number. You can call the city clerk's number if you want, which is 263-3310. There's always a couple of us monitoring that, and then we will get you where you need to go. The non-emergency number for the city police department is 265-1482. Yeah. But there are times when it isn't appropriate for a community resource officer or the police department to address certain issues. And then they have to go try to determine who it is. So calling the central number with the clerk's office usually is the best. Then we can immediately try to determine who would be best to address the issue. And staff is very responsive to all of those.
Give me that number again. I've got it.
So the clerk's office is 263-3310, and the police department non-emergency number is 265-1482. That's their office.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, anything else? I think the idea about well, you do have something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think prompted us down this path a little bit with this concept of a North Star for our group. And I personally found this very helpful as far as helping us align on short-term, long-term goals. I think day one, I was trying to take a step back and say, a year from now, in my position and in all of our positions on this committee, how could we evaluate? Did we do a okay job, a good job, a great job, or did nothing happen? And going through that document was really helpful on the punchline that for me coming out of it was there's at least stated priority from the city on pedestrian and bicycling, which is great. From what I could gather, I didn't make it through all of the analysis of the state of the state, but it sounded like we've had awards as a city, as a walkable city in the past. And so in the realm of you could have a horrible walkability or the best in the country, it seems like we're better than most, which is, so we have a good place to start. And so for me, I was just trying to figure out what's the state of the state. And then what are the goals? And for me, what continued to surface was, more walkways, better walkways, more bicycling lanes and better bicycling lanes. And so there's kind of a mix of goals. And I get some of the shared feedback that you had, Molly, of I think the challenge for probably any local government is all of the overlapping priorities between cars and bikes and how do you spend dollars. And for me, there was at least some anchors and key themes in there. That is, if someone comes to us with a project to fund or there's a new development, there's at least key themes that can help us think, okay, does this help us? Does this further us along on one of those goals where we can look 6 months from now and say, hey, we actually have more sidewalks from this new housing development that went in, or we were able to take this grant and improve sidewalks in the priority network. And I found that the priority network mapping was really helpful for me as a citizen and for our role too, of a lot of different things you can do and like, how do we focus our efforts on the best kind of bang for your buck initiatives? So my takeaway was like, would challenge all of us. I need to spend more time with it. I challenge all of us to go through it. It's awesome to surprise it because it is a big document and going through that in the master plan of the city, there's a lot in there, but I think for me, I found it useful and relevant for us as we just think about our goals, what items warrant getting on the agenda, the right framework for us providing input and making decisions on things. And so I think I appreciate you sharing it, Jason, and I think it's a good exercise for us to go through. And the concept from the business world that may be applicable for us as we figure out the right committees and things like that is this concept of SMART goals, which is an acronym about just specific, measurable, actionable, trackable, achievable, realistic. And if we think about if, we have a subcommittee on, we're gonna improve like quality of the sidewalks and maintenance. How do we measure that? And it could be these walkability audits, it could be community input. We could do our own audit. We could look at how many times someone in the community takes a picture and shares it with us. So it feels like we have a good foundation and a framework to work off of here and can take these high level goals, which at a time that sometimes are kind of hard to digest of how do you make it actionable of, okay, we want more sidewalks. What does that mean? But I think we can, when we get into some more subcommittees and specific topics, we can try to come up with SMART goals around those categories to just help kind of steer.
Thanks. Other thoughts on the MTMP? It was really just trying to get everybody up to speed or background.
So I guess, one thought followed by a question. So I think what you said at the beginning of your summary helped in that this is primarily like a guiding document for portable projects. That helps me understand it a little better because I was wondering about conflicts I see in some of the plans with some of the stated goals. So like the 20-year plan having Oak Street, which I also use all the time, which everyone in town uses as a designated priority for pedestrians and bicyclists with sharrows, with very recently built wide lanes for everyone to share, suddenly getting cut off in 20 years, having a hiccup if the couplet happens. Like there's actually a line in there that says, and now Oak Street will have a break in traffic. I know that this is not something that gets revised very often. What is our role in, is there a time to call those sorts of things out? Is that only when that discussion of that project begins? Is it just kind of like, these are just ideas? For those of us who haven't been in these kinds of plans or projects before, like what happens with those sorts of discrepancies?
So I can speak to that a little bit, and that the couplet is not necessarily an acceptable solution for a lot of people. So especially some of our newer council members that push back against the idea of couplet. And then the whole Boyer intersection. So just because this was accepted as a master plan, there are a lot of great things in the master plan. One of them being like a lot of the revisions to be done on Division Street.
Yeah.
And moving that along, but when you get a big giant master plan, you don't always like all the pieces and parts, but you've spent a lot of money on it. So I know that there's discussion in continuing to look at that Boyer intersection. A lot of us just think that it's dysfunctional and it cuts people off even in cars, let alone it seems very out of sorts for even pedestrians. You go this way and then you go that way and then you just end up back on board again. So it doesn't make logical sense. So I would say that, and also the couplet thing are going to be some of the first things that really get looked at again as far as council direction. It would be very important for bikes and ped to be involved in it that time, if that makes sense. Does
Yeah.
that help guide
So the
you a
fact that
little bit
it's
there?
in here doesn't necessarily mean anything. at all
Nothing is
as
ever
far as
written in stone at the city. Just
Okay.
remember that, no matter what it is, because it's an ordinance, it's a law, and if council decides they want to change the ordinance or get rid of the ordinance, then that's at their will to be able to do that. So everything is always changeable, but then even when you want it to be changed, some things sort of get stuck in there and they get pushed forward and happen. You don't always want them to happen, and Molly can kind of speak to that too. So, don't let a dead dog lie because it, might get up and take over.
It's on the map anywhere.
Yeah. If it's a picture, get scared. So don't ever believe the pictures. So I don't know. I don't want to I try to be brief and concise when I make my comments because I've sat in a lot of long meetings.
Okay, so basically, like, stuff that's in here that we're like, wow, that's weird, that seems to disagree with
If
this,
you hate it,
then,
take it on.
then ignore it for now until it comes up. and-
You don't necessarily have to ignore it, you
Okay.
know, if it's something you're passionate about and you think there's a better direction, and then what happens in this committee will move up towards the council. So if you guys are, start the fire of, we don't even want to see this in the master plan anymore, this just needs to be dealt with. It needs to be redone, council, push the council to make it happen to get it.
Okay, so we don't necessarily
take on
wait
some
for
of those
cues on
pieces.
that, we can decide.
Yeah, kind of grassroots. It starts at the bottom with the citizens because that's who we represent as council. So it's got to start somewhere. That makes sense.
That helps, yeah, thank you.
Colleen, what sort of major projects are sort of being noodled around or early thoughts?
For for our sidewalk projects in 22, the Resort City tax was passed. And so with that tax, there were 7 sidewalk projects identified. So with that Resort City tax funding, every construction season, we've been knocking off one of those projects. So I think the next one on the list, I should know it off the top of my head since we just went through budgeting. And sorry, I don't, it might be,
Time and division stuff.
well,
Or is that further down?
not with the Resort City tax. It was a
Okay.
grant. Yeah, that was a
The grant,
grant.
that was
Gosh, we did Washington Elementary School last year. We did Larch last year. I don't know if we're trying to chip off Ella. I can't remember. I can pull it up.
In Cedar Street starting, I thought that was going on last spring, but I have, like the sidewalk and the street by the library.
So Cedar Street is a road reconstruction project that's under design. We have preliminary design was just submitted to the city. So we're gonna have here in the next month an open house scheduled. So Cedar Street between Division and Lincoln, full road reconstruction. When we reconstruct a road per our ordinance, we do complete streets. So we'll have to have something for ped and bicycle. So on our city code, we also have a requirement that on a collector road, we have 6-foot sidewalk on both sides of the street. So we have a really narrow right of way in that area. So one challenge that we're having to figure out is how do we accommodate pedestrian, bikes, and roads along this corridor? So we took a concept to council and had HMH engineering on board to start preliminary design. They have the preliminary design. Our next step is to have a public open house and get feedback on how we're balancing all of those road users on this corridor.
And could we have that preliminary design come to our next meeting?
It could, so I don't know how you guys are operating. Is it to attend the public open house or do we?
I think most of us would try to do that, but the nice thing about a committee meeting is we can hear each other think and talk. And a public open house, you sort of wander around and it's just what you happen to see. And it would, in the past, the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee was in on planning for things like that, and trade-offs had to be made. They were part of figuring out what is gonna work best. I mean, trade-offs get made. Okay, how do we make the best of it? So it would be nice to start having that be part of what we just generally, you go, oh yeah, well, we'll be running this by the committee. They'll help me think this through.
Well, I guess, so I wasn't here for the first meeting. I'm not sure what your goals and objectives are and what are you trying to accomplish? One thing I would offer from a public outreach perspective when I manage, so background about me, I manage our construction project. So the purpose is I take a plan and I implement it. And actually see it through construction. So one thing I struggle with is that public outreach component and I do public open houses and I'll put flyers out, but it is hard to hear from the community on what they want. So for Cedar Street, for example, would this committee, would you be interested? Could you help with that outreach and talking to the folks on Cedar and figuring out the users on Cedar to say, would you prefer a path or a sidewalk? Would you prefer, is the purpose of the community to kind of get feedback from the community on what they want? Or is it less about public outreach? Does that, sorry for the rambling question, but
Yes.
it kind of would help me address your question on like, would it be better for me to give you the 30% review for you to review in a silo or?
What do you mean by 30%?
So our engineer is coming up with a design, and so they have it's a piece of paper plan set. And they have done 30% of the work.
Yeah. So we come in at the 30% point instead of when it's 80% done.
It's a really good time to come in
Right.
because they're not having to rework a ton. So they took a concept of, we need to redo this road. They put it on paper and now is the time that we can pick it apart and really hone in on what we want without there being a big cost component that they're redoing a bunch of work. So now's the time for input.
It's a nice segue into the next item on our agenda, which was how this committee can support the planning division in the development. We were talking about the development review process, and I was thinking more in development of, housing developments or buildings, get in early on those so we can say, well, we need a walkway here or a bike path here or here. And Molly had talked with me about how that was the previous PED bike committee had input on. I was thinking only building projects, building of buildings as opposed to building of streets. Were you thinking of street projects too? It makes sense to me, Jason. Does that fit?
We were absolutely involved in early on, which is where you've got the most ability to bring your perspective. And yes, we were involved in streets too.
And Jason, when I talked with you about this originally, you thought that we would not be providing input until after plans had been publicly posted. Is that something that we have to do? And is that past 30%? Can we put in something before we get to that point?
Well, so most of our building permits are just administratively handled by the building department and the planning department. We do code compliance checks to make sure that any proposed structure achieves the setback requirements and so on. It's really not appropriate for a committee to be reviewing, my neighbor Sally's building permit when she wants to add a little garage unit on her property, because what she's allowed to do is dictated by our code. She has her property rights, and we have codes that protect the public interest. So that the committee doesn't need to dive into Sally's building plans for her ADU or her parking garage. For a large development like a short plat where new lots are being created, we likewise have codes that require the dedication of public right of way where there might not be enough right of way, and the improvements to sidewalks around the property. We have our standards in code and then of course the building code around how sidewalks get built. There's not a lot of need for this committee to weigh in on short plat or minor subdivisions like that because we've got it handled, right? So I think the question is like, what about a big subdivision? What about something that's creating 100 new lots and you're going to see like a whole new part of town developed? That's also that's a process that goes through a public hearing. Basically, anything more than four lots being created has to be brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission for approval through the subdivision process, right? And that's where the public does get the chance to weigh in. That's why it's called a public hearing. So the public is invited to participate in that process. And we've seen packed houses here, Kate, you and me, on the Planning Commission saw 100 people in this room for certain subdivisions, right?
So, but I'm just wondering about when can our committee be most useful in that process? And
Right.
it seems to me if we could weigh in before that public hearing,
Well,
then our ideas and concerns could be made, the public could be made aware of.
so legally, the only commission that has the ability to approve or disapprove of site plans is the Planning and Zoning Commission. They only make recommendations to city council for those plans. So as members of the public and as advocates representing the interests of bicyclists and pedestrians in Sandpoint, you of course will be invited to weigh in on those plans as well. But whether or not they have to go through some pre-approval by the Pike Pedestrian Bicycle Commission, there's no basis for that in our code.
Mhm.
So it's really a touchy issue when we start to say that we're gonna have a citizen, design review board that's gonna look for pedestrian and bicycle things, because we have code that dictate what's required in those
Mhm.
things. And as members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, they will be, through the advisement of our professional planning staff, receiving that staff report. And if the staff has done their job, then all of the requirements of code will have been met by the time it gets to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The
Mhm.
Planning and Zoning Commission, gets their chance, and then the public gets their chance through the public hearing to weigh in as well. So that's really the appropriate time for a committee like this to be weighing in.
So, yeah,
And I know Molly has a different.
Well, it was different
yeah.
from 2004 until 2019. This group looked before the staff report was generated and recommended to staff. Developers were invited and told, this committee does not have any power. It doesn't say yes or no. It's just looking at at your pedestrian bike facilities and making recommendations to staff. And often developers would go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll add that in. And, we got walkways from the Kinnick thing into Skidwell, so students didn't go around on Division. We got bike parking close to entrances, but not blocking pedestrians. Got ADA parking that was convenient and on a flat ground. We got connectivity between dead end streets with Turnstone. I wanted the committee to recommend that the sidewalk continue to Mackey's Lane so that it actually went somewhere. And maybe, and a crossing here or there across Ontario. There are things to look at that staff doesn't always put in its recommendations because this committee is so focused. And if staff doesn't like a recommendation, it doesn't put it in its recommendation. And committee members can go to the public hearing and say, I think this should be added. We don't represent the committee as committee members. So the council would get our minutes, but really what we have added to staff recommendations is our value. And that is, and I encourage you to try it and see how it works. See if you feel it adds value. It's not in the code one way or the other. I don't think so. You can decide you don't like it.
Yeah, I'm also thinking of something that we didn't get, like Molly was talking about some of the things we did get when I did the walk to school yesterday. I learned about a child who lives in Ridley Village, and to walk to Washington School, he has to cross Route 2 at Ridley Village, walk down to Ontario and cross Route 2 again. And if we could have recommended some pedestrian way to get from Ridley Village to Ontario, or even into the back of the charter school, maybe he wouldn't have to do that. That would make things way safer. And maybe that developer would not be required by code to put that in, but maybe that developer would want to anyway, because they're a good guy. So
I can give you an example. So that property might very well be coming up for development, and they are going to be required to dedicate right of way through that development to connect Ridley Village to South Madison. And of course, with the 60-foot right of way dedication, that will mean that there will be a 4-foot buffer on either side of the 30-foot, 2-foot drive aisle and a 5-foot paved parking or sidewalk on either side. So that, that's in our code. It's just required that when the subdivision goes through, connections must be made from one street to another. So that's the planning staff's job to assure that, and the engineering staff. So our city engineer and our city planner are working with the developer there to make sure that that connectivity is achieved.
Mhm.
So we don't have a submitted concept for that yet, but that's something that's in the very early development stages. So
So that's.
when that goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission, all of that work will have been done.
And
because
that's cool to learn in that example. Things will have been improved. And, but for the larger issue, from Molly's perspective and from Holly saying to get in at the 30% level, it makes sense to me for us to, and I'm not sure what the point is at which we discuss something. It just seems like early.
Well, there's also a difference between public infrastructure projects and private, development projects. It's the private developers who we see daily at City Hall have their very focused interest, right? To get their developments done as cheaply as possible and get them on the market as quickly as possible and sell them for as high a price as possible. That's just how private development works. So that's where, like, the planning staff, we have to often check the expectations of those private developers to let them know that there's a process that has to be followed here. And there are several rounds of plan checks that have to be completed by our staff to make sure that these plans are compliant with our zoning ordinances, our engineering requirements, and so on. So that all happens already. So we have our professional planning staff who does the compliance checks, and everything Molly just mentioned, those things are required by code. You can't put bike racks in front of pedestrian right of way. There has to be a level ADA access parking spot for certain types of developments. So if anybody misses anything on staff, that's a failure of staff. But our staff are experts and professionals in our code and in the what's required from an engineering perspective of these private developers. But if it's a project that, we have control over as the city, like we want to connect Lincoln to Division along Cedar with all these sidewalks, like that's us who's doing that design. So it's Holly and her team that's doing that design and the engineers that we've hired. So we are the developers in that case.
Well, and I'll add, we also are working off standards and codes.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So one thing you might look at if something happens in planning that you're not happy with, or something happens on a capital city project that you're not happy with, it could be a code amendment or an
That's where
ordinance
this
that
committee
gets
comes in.
passed. So I think that you're being able to give staff tools they need to direct them to get what you want via code. I mean, I told Deb and he told me he didn't like it, but I try not to have opinions. I try to just do like as directed. And sometimes it's really clear in code and sometimes it's gray. And so maybe if we get out of that gray code and we have more standards, that might be a tool for you to get better projects and products out of staff.
And that is among our duties. And number C in our duties is discuss and provide advice regarding pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure citywide, including on development applications. So it's in the code that, we look at that. We've also looked, there are things on division that if we looked at as a committee might have been done differently. And I don't know, but
I'm kind of confused at the moment, to be honest, about where we fit in this process. I'm wondering if any of the rest of you have thoughts or opinions or perspectives.
I wouldn't mind sharing how I'm interpreting this is think about the grand scheme, hundreds and hundreds of development projects happening. My interpretation is it's not our view to be involved in every development that happens, private, public, and weigh in. I mean, in part because of practicality. What I'm hearing is our goal is more thematic issues across the city, big thematic issues or opportunities as we see them, and kind of getting the right citizen input, research if needed, and providing recommendations on, hey, maybe this is a tweak to the master plan or a code change that bicycle lanes need to be wider, that, items like that to try to impact things holistically rather than on a basis. That's how I'm reading this. I don't know if that's consistent or if anybody else has
And
thoughts on that or not?
I'm only talking about things that go to planning and zoning. Everything else,
And
So I just have a thought because of what, like to play off what Holly said, that you feel like sometimes you're stuck in a gray area and there's not good guidance. And I guess I would request that if you're finding, you know, as you go through your regular job, a part of the ordinances or our specific city code, that that's the type of thing that could come to this committee. It could start here and then bubble its way up to the council level. Because if you're seeing it and you're the professional and you feel caught, that if we can make your job easier and your end product way better, I think that's what all of us are looking for.
Just to quickly add on that, I feel like that to me is a really big point, because I might be looking at this, you Molly, but just reading what do we do in our committee? It says advises mayor, city council, and planning and zoning commission. Like, to me, part of it is like asking the mayor, asking city council, asking you, like, how can we best be a tool for you? Where your challenge is, how can we help represent, the citizens as a tool for you? And I think just the item you flagged earlier of sometimes just getting the right people's input. Maybe we could do an education campaign, maybe we can put feet on the street, maybe we can do a lot of different things to help you with the right input to just be effective in all of us solving our broader kind of pedestrian and bicycle collectively.
so I just using this Cedar Street as an example. Would it be helpful to you to present something about that plan to us now? Are we now at the 30%?
So I,
I don't mean right now at this meeting, but at our next meeting, for example, and then we could give you input that you could include in your public hearing that we could also go to.
so
We chose as individuals.
I would like to get, my plan was with Cedar Street to have an open house scheduled in the next 30 days. My schedule could slip to provide, if that was the appropriate path to go, that you guys look at this plan set first. What I kind of think that might be helpful is if the committee engaged with the neighborhood, so Cedar Street. The only thing that's gray about it is that our right of way is very narrow. So we can put sidewalk on both sides of the street. That's what our ordinance says to do. It's a collector road. We don't have room to put in bike lanes, so we would either have a sharrow or we don't have stormwater treatment. So there's kind of those, like, we are limited by the space. So as long as our user group says it's okay to be on sharrows, well, perhaps they'd prefer to have a multi-use path on one side. A multi-use path isn't great when you're going across driveway connections. So there's a little more nuance to this project that we don't typically have, because we would typically have a standard right of way and a standard cross section. So this project's gonna have a little more of a conversation, council approved a concept. And so we are bringing, that concept is now in the 30%. Now's the time to have a conversation with the neighborhood and say, okay, how are you going to use this corridor? And I think it would make sense at that same time to get input from the committee on what your input is on how you perceive that corridor would be used. It could be separate meetings or the same.
Well, it seems to me like a good topic for us to bring up. For me, it would be really helpful to have if you have a 10 or 15-minute PowerPoint type of presentation to ask us those questions you were just listing off. I just don't know all the things to consider, and wow, what good
It's
is a
hard
bike
without
lane if the
visuals.
streets flooded? And it would also give me an example of a point at which we might want to have input into a project. So, but if you waited till our next meeting, which is a month from now, and we haven't made any arrangements for other meetings, and then your open house could not be until later, how much problem is that gonna cause for you?
It would slow me down a bit. We're trying to get this out to bid in January. So we're going from 30% to 100 in the next couple months. So, and it's something for me to manage.
Mhm.
Quick question, subcommittees, is there,
Mhm.
is there guidelines on the frequency of meeting and when that happens, where that happens?
There's nothing
There's
at
a
all.
minimum, there's not a max.
Minimum.
We're
The
supposed to
committee.
meet at least 4 times a year.
If the subcommittee isn't a quorum of this committee, my hunch is they can meet when they want. Bring recommendations to the whole.
For example, I'm just spitballing here, but if we had 2 or 3 people that decided the broad mix of different subcommittees, that maybe one of them is related to planning and commission input on active projects. And maybe that is a path that could help us to not slow down a process that's in the works, while also getting the right feedback and getting you at least some subset of this group to help support those initiatives.
So are you suggesting perhaps we could form a subcommittee now that could listen to her presentation sometime within the next couple of weeks and then not slow her down as much?
Mhm.
So it seems like a reasonable idea to me. Is there anyone here who would like to be on that subcommittee? I haven't figured out a way to form subcommittees, so I'm kind of winging it here.
Well, we walk from the library and I do a lot of stuff with farming, so I do see the kids and all that right there.
Mm-hmm,
So I do have some opinions about how they use it, I guess.
mm-hmm. So
So I
Erin,
could
would you,
be on it.
okay.
if that's okay.
Anyone else interested in this?
And just a clarifying question, so it's 5 people, if 5 people meet, it's considered a quorum and then it's an official, so, okay. Okay, I'm happy to.
Okay,
Subcommittee.
we have room for one more if someone would like to do it. Okay,
I'm not quite sure how I.
Julie might, she was at Mark Fenton thing. And she's interested in these kinds of things.
So would the goal of the subcommittee be to recommend give our recommendation at this public forum? Is that why we want to have
Oh,
it
that's a
before the
good
public
question.
forum? Just because I don't think our play should be to try to influence the public either at these events. It should be like our opinion in unison with the public, and then the city can make their.
My sense of the subcommittee was that they were to give input to Holly to help her
Yeah.
make her plan.
But so is the public forums as well. So I'm just wondering if they just
Well,
run in
it-
unison. So you have a public forum. The public gives their input. I mean, the subcommittee can show up to the public forum, if they want to give their personal input. They meet, agree on, I guess, our stance as a whole, and then give that opinion to the city.
I had it going in a little different order where the subcommittee needs to meet as soon as possible to hear from Holly about the project and provide
Yeah.
input to her and help her prepare that thing that goes to
Is
the
there-
public forum.
But this is the 30% meeting. Is there, I mean, do you have input before the 30% from H&M? Whoever it is,
So
they give the 30%.
I'm not, again, I'm not sure I've never not worked or worked committees before, so I'm not sure what the formalities are, but I can share with my projects that this 30% design, the next step is to have an open house with the public, take those comments, go to council and get the preliminary plans approved, and then we move forward with design. So there's going to be an opportunity, the purpose of the open house is to get feedback from the public on all the design details. We're putting a sidewalk in right on your property. What does that mean for you? To get those comments kind of flushed out. I don't want a sidewalk in my front yard, and then council can see those comments and give staff feedback on the 30%. So that's the formality on how council would provide comments or direct staff. They'll have feedback from the neighborhood and they'll get to see how the neighborhood is perceiving and see the neighborhood's comments and then direct staff on how to address those comments.
I guess my take would be that the reason to have the subcommittee is to bring a stronger 30% product to the public for them to have their feedback, for then it to rise to the level of council and get pre-approval, because assuming that we're a bike ped committee, we're becoming more educated. We're learning things about the walkability. We're going on these things. We have people who are always in that area watching what really happens and goes on with that sidewalk or lack of sidewalk now. And so we may have that experience that we can add to a 30% product, that then it becomes a stronger product going through the public process. That's kind of how I interpret what this committee would be doing.
This subcommittee.
The subcommittee would be doing to help with that. And then everybody who's a private citizen can have more input in that, when it's the public, forum, or what are you?
The neighborhood will be important.
Right, and then it rises up to council to be approved. I mean, that would be,
So it adds a step for you between now and the public hearing where you would meet with the subcommittee and they would give you benefit of their feedback.
And your staff, you accept it or you don't.
it makes, yeah, if it
We
makes
don't-
sense
we-
to you,
we
or if
don't-
it makes
yes or
more.
no, we don't have power.
Yeah.
We're few more eyes, few more questions, few more perspectives. But you can walk away and say, well, that was a waste of time, or you can go, I got some good ideas. I'm gonna incorporate them. That's yours. We have no power over you.
That to me is the punchline of it. A lot of times when we're rolling out a new initiative, it's like you start, you bring in a subgroup of specific subject matter experts, and then you kind of roll it out wide stream. And it seems like that may or may not be a tool that's valuable to you here, is we can go in very focused on just pedestrian and bicycle. You have all your other stakeholders to balance too, but we can weigh in on that, influence that ahead of a public meeting, and then let the public weigh in on what's important to them. And maybe what we added impacts that or not, but it's just kind of one extra step to help shape the.
Give it a try.
Yeah, that too.
Give it a try.
May I weigh in just on the formality of subcommittees for the various commissions and committees in general?
I can't hear you very well.
So for subcommittees of a committee, and I caught half of what you guys were talking about, but just so you know how they're supposed to work, and how they've been working, for instance, for the Arts, Culture, Historic Preservation Commission, they've been using subcommittees regularly and successfully. The subcommittees are those that are formed that are not a quorum of the group, but they're a specific subcommittee that's formed to go and do specific research, information gathering, possibly conversations with staff, that happens. And then they bring that back to the full group. So if recommendations are made, the recommendations are made from the entire committee based on the information that's brought from the subcommittee. I just wanted to point that out, that there can be recommendations coming from a subcommittee that go to council. That has to come from the committee as a whole.
Okay, yeah. So it seems like the timeline isn't gonna work on the Cedar Street project.
Specific.
Yeah, and we just have to let that one go and.
Well, or I don't know if you let it go, but maybe the comments just lag the 30%. So we'll take the 30% design to council. We get comments from Ped Bike at that same, or I guess it only goes from council.
Supposed to advise council. And if we haven't met and looked at it, we're not in a position to advise council. That's one of our duties.
So I heard, Holly, you said you wanted to do the public outreach in the next 30 days, but it wouldn't go to council within the next 30 days. So
So we would just come in.
what, this body meet again in 30 days?
Well,
Outreach.
We're still working on.
Provide their own input
Right.
to provide it
Well,
feedback to council.
I was, yeah, like could this effort happen with the public's effort? Right, in parallel.
What is the mechanism though for the subcommittee to get the information about Cedar Street? Do they just go to the public presentation to learn about it? Do they work directly with Holly? What's considered reasonable to ask of staff?
I think that from my perspective, the public meeting would be great. I could also do a separate, like 30-minute rundown on the project and present it, and then give you an opportunity to provide comments or even a site walk.
So members of that subcommittee, Aaron, Molly, Evan, Julie, how would you feel about setting that up? Molly, would you like to have a separate, I mean, with Molly? Uh, would you like to set that up with her? Shall I just, let you guys run with that and you can set that up however works with you and her? Seem reasonable?
Well, I think when we did the division thing, how we kind of were out there, if you wouldn't mind going out there with us and just saying what the 30% looks like.
Yeah, it's
And
probably
then we could.
getting the visuals easier than looking at black and white on paper.
Yeah, well, but with the paper.
You can do the walk.
Go in dry weather. Yeah, great. That's a great idea.
And that gives this, and anybody on this committee is welcome to come to the public engagement, the public outreach thing that you plan between now and 30 days from now. And then if this committee meets again in a month, then this committee could be in a position with the recommendation of the subcommittee members to make a committee recommendation to council.
Sounds cool. So, coming to the end of our meeting time here, and this seems maybe like a good place to things down. I really appreciate everybody's patience with the process, which I am only just trying to understand. And one issue for subcommittee members and for me is part of the next agenda item, which was email addresses. If you three committee members are going to want to get together, you may need to contact one another. Jason, where are we at with email addresses for
I
everybody
don't
else?
have my laptop, but as I've gotten people who have created email addresses, as I've received those, I've added them to my spreadsheet. If you're still getting emails from Melissa or myself or Heather at an old address, I apologize. It means I haven't updated my spreadsheet.
So if Aaron and Evan and
I think Melissa has her own, or Heather, are you tracking emails as they get changed as well?
I'm updating my contact list, yes, as
Okay.
they get updated.
Okay.
I don't track with those.
I probably just need to coordinate with you to make sure we have the correct contact list before we contact.
so, and if Aaron and Evan and Molly want to contact one another, can you provide them with email addresses to do that?
Melissa, may subcommittee members communicate with each other via email?
It's good to know. How about committee members? Can we?
Well, just not as a quorum, right? You can communicate with each other, but just not to the whole committee.
I see.
So that's why we BCC your email addresses when you get emails from the city, so that you can't reply all accidentally. Oh, and trust me, every committee and commission and council gets in trouble at some point for accidentally
Okay.
doing that.
And you can't individually talk to every single person
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
about something.
But they
This
just,
way-
they need to get hold of one another. So, and that's, seems like a reasonable way.
Yeah, we'll exchange information before we leave today.
I have one other request. I'm realizing that Wednesday is going to work much better for me than Thursday for these meetings. I was concerned about city staff with respect to Wednesday having council meetings in the evening. And then Jason, you said there might be some other.
I think Parks and Rec Commission meets, but their scheduled time is 3 o'clock. Is that right, Melissa? They met at 3 o'clock yesterday. We just don't want to schedule two committee meetings at the same time.
That's kind of brutal for me too.
Wednesdays are,
Because if I have to do this, plus I have to do council.
it's just like a day at work for a city staff person.
Trust me, after I do all my other job that I have to
Also-
go back to, or I'm gonna be, yeah,
There's probably a lot of
I've
stuff
already
to do like
scheduled
that.
Thursdays off
Wednesday.
on my schedule too.
Well, no, we were only gonna do it on second and fourth Wednesdays, not first and third Wednesdays. Never do it on the same day as council meeting. Like the Parks and Rec Commission met yesterday because there's no council meeting yesterday. They would never meet on a Wednesday when there's also a council meeting.
I've already scheduled my Thursdays off because I thought this was gonna be the
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was informed as.
Well, that seems fair. And so I might miss another meeting or two if it's on Thursday instead of Wednesday, but, we have Molly who can conduct the meetings. I just thought I'd throw that out and never caught it.
It's okay.
Aren't you more flexible than me?
Are you
I'm
retired?
way more flexible than you. I definitely higher. I don't know. So other announcements or comments? Concerns? Okay,
No, I think the subcommittee will hang out for a few minutes and see if we can just set up a meeting with time with Holly.
Is it possible to keep the subcommittee discussion broadly on the agenda for next meeting, since we
We're supposed to
really,
report back.
oh, the
I
meeting,
mean,
the
broadly, like, we can have other subcommittees, what are the subcommittees?
yes, good, that should definitely go on the agenda for next month. Thank you, Evan. All right. Other concerns? With no further business on the agenda, this meeting is now adjourned at 12:57 PM. All right.